Elden Ring is an atrocious nightmare, and here's why. Hold on, calm yourself. I literally just made a video about why I love Elden Ring and what a great game it is. This video is just the opposite of that. I am going to talk about the things that I am having issue with. I'm nitpicking. It's not a perfect game. No game is perfect. It may be perfect for some of you, but there are some things to complain about, some things to have frustrations with, outside of just the difficulty of the game, legitimate frustrations. And that's what I'm going to talk about this time. So if you are in the headspace that needs to feel positivity towards this game right now, and only positivity, I suggest you watch that other video first, and then come back here. That's a-okay with me. But like last time, this is spoiler free. I have an outline, I have some things I want to talk about, and probably also some things that didn't make it into this outline, because I wrote this outline at about 80 hours of play, 75, and I'm at about 100 hours of play now. So I'm going in hard a little bit. So forgive me if any of these things seem a little bit too nitpicky, but they stick in my craw. So maybe they're sticking in yours too. First things first, mounted combat. Mounted combat feels weird to me. Not that it doesn't feel cool, it does feel good to actually control. I would say in the first place that it is a bit repetitive. So when I'm fighting giant creatures, if I'm fighting a giant crab or a dragon, then the horse-mounted combat feels amazing because it makes sense. There is a reason for me to need to be able to cross those vast distances fighting enemies that would be very difficult, if nigh impossible, to fight on land, on foot, just because the speed of the characters is so different. However, the combat itself is also fairly repetitive. You know, you charge in one direction, you have attacks on both sides, you have heavy attacks on both sides. You can cast magic on horsetop, but I am not using magic, so that option's not really available to me. I've also tried shooting a bow on horseback, but it rarely hits. It seems as though timing on the bow is even more precise than timing with, sword slashes or even using the bow off of the horse. And all of that is to say that even though I am finding some minor issues with the horseback riding, it does feel very realistic, and that's why I am of two minds on the horseback riding, the horseback combat. When I'm fighting other horseback enemies, it seems as though my moveset is rather limited compared to movesets that are uniquely designed for horseback enemies. And the combat ends up being a very repetitive, horses run toward each other, there's an opportunity for a hit, if you miss, oh well, you turn around and you do it again. The reason I am ambivalent about that is because even though I'm finding that combat particularly boring, it also feels like a realistic joust. It feels like how it should be to the kind of combat that you are engaging with. So can I say that it is a failure? No. But does it feel good? Also no. So I'm not sure where to land on that point in particular. My next gripe that I have with the game is that the character builds are very inflexible. And for a game that is constantly showing you all of the different options that you could be taking, having started out as a samurai and put mostly into Dex and Arcane, even putting some into Arcane felt like a little bit of a waste of time. Honestly, that is frustrating, to have to see all of the options you could be doing and not have access to them. Wonderful, someone's mowing the lawn right as I finally put the game down to start recording. Oy. Hopefully you guys can't hear that. I'm not seeing it picked up on the microphone. Anyways, what was I saying? Beyond the fact that the game is also just showing you tons of options for what you could be doing with the character, the range of damage values, of statistical character builds, the range of stats, is significantly larger than any of the other Souls games. Each point that you put into every stat does give you very significant boosts in damage and resistance and health and I guess equip load. Equip load I'm having a little bit more trouble gauging, and right now I'm using a lot of items that modify my equip load but are temporary. Things like talismans and rune arcs with a particular rune equipped. I'm still trying to avoid spoilers. This is spoiler free. Maybe I'll have to splice that into an earlier part of the video. And with all of this time investment that the game has because of how large the game is, the option to respec the character doesn't even begin until approximately 40 to 60 hours of play, depending on your playstyle. Maybe significantly less if you just follow a very straight line, but then you're also not going to be seeing or accessing a lot of the things that I'm talking about, so you might not even have much of a desire to respec your character. The respecking material itself is also very rare. My very first attempt at it, I had only 2 of the items necessary to do a character respec. I had what I thought was a pretty good idea for mixing Frostbite and Blood Loss in the same build for a power stancing set. And unfortunately, as soon as I did, I entirely screwed it up. I didn't realize how much poise was a factor in the playstyle I had already adopted. And that kind of leads me into my next point, because I had to use my second and last respec item to just switch back to a more streamlined version of what I was already doing in order to feel comfortable moving forward. And maybe that's a me thing, it probably is, but it also makes me feel as though the character background that you choose for this game is more important than ever, because that background will determine not just your stats, but your play style for approximately 30 to 40 hours of play. An entire video game's worth of habit building and pattern recognition devoted to a single kind of play before you even have the option to try something else. So what's resulting is that I have a significant amount of fear of missing out whenever I find something new. Even when I find things that are adjacent to my build, if I find other katanas that I could use, my stats don't accommodate for them. And so I'm still running the same weapon that I started with, but I would like to be using the other weapons. However, upgrade materials are also a little bit more far and few between, so I do really feel like I'm locked into the one weapon that I started with. To actually get out of that pattern will take even more time investment, farming in locations that I don't yet know where to farm to get the materials I need to bring a different weapon up to where the one I'm using is currently sitting in terms of raw physical damage, in terms of having a comparable amount of damage of a different type. I will say I did bite the bullet and move myself off of a weapon art, an Ash that was blood-centric, and switched to a frost-centric weapon art, and it actually worked out pretty well. I am pretty happy with it, and that switch has made me feel a little bit more free to switch up that weapon art to give myself a little bit more variety, customizability that will help me tackle different situations in the game. I'm willing to change off of the blood loss slash and into, say, holy damage when fighting the ones who live in death, or frost when I feel like I'm going to be fighting more groups than singular enemies. Or the frost item, the frost art that I'm using is very good for getting a wider area, so enemies that are moving more quickly away or doing a lot of circular motions can still get caught in it. So there are options. I'm not saying that character build is limited in any way. I'm just saying that it is limited for a very long time, and that can create habits that can make it difficult to break out of and explore different play styles. Even while the game is promising tons of replayability and different possible builds and playstyles that you could experiment with. So this next one isn't so much a gripe that I am personally having, but one that I have been seeing expressed by other people, and that is feeling as though your character has become overpowered for earlier game areas. And at first I wasn't feeling this because I thought that I had leveled up significantly, and when I was going back through old areas, I was still feeling a bit of a challenge. It was only later that I recognized that I actually hadn't leveled up all that much, and that there was way more to go, way more levels to go in the scale of what I was operating with. My sense of scale expanded now that I've realized the extent of the stat variability that this game has, significantly more than previous From Software games. And some people who play these games do want to go into every single experience feeling a difficult challenge placed in front of them. I understand that, and this game offers plenty of that. There are quite a few just kind of in the field, way too strong for you enemies that I've encountered just in the past couple days. Even though Caelid is an early game section, there are parts of Caelid scattered about that are way harder than what you would expect anything else in that area to be. For my personal preference, I actually find it significantly more fun sometimes to go back to old areas and just steamroll my way through. I believe I mentioned in the earlier video, there is equal opportunity to both have the challenge that you're looking for and the power fantasy, and I'm re-including it in this video because I do feel two ways about it, because to one extent I get the problem with it. Sometimes I feel like I'm just doing busy work in the game when I go back to older areas. However, I also sometimes really enjoy it. It's really just a matter of what my mood is at the time, rather than an aspect of the game design or the game's quality. Alright, here's my fourth gripe with the game, and this one is actually really specific. I don't like demi-humans. I don't like that they're included, I don't like how they're depicted, and I don't like, well, I guess you could say, fantasy tropes that are associated with Western narratives being expressed through them. Well, to say it very expressly, it is very imperialist and colonialist in tone. The depiction of barbarous races or bestial races that are tribal in nature, that are lesser intelligence or more feral, stated very explicitly in some of the item descriptions, where even though they are depicted as having society and able to cast magic, they are denigrated for being beast-like. There is also a group of tarnished who are presented as darker skinned and wearing tribal clothes as their main outfits. The barbarian group of the Lu clan, I think it is. These are problematic tropes simply because it reinforces what has essentially been European narratives of depicting black bodies as primitive, but also as depicting black bodies as bestial, as being monkey-like, and calling black people monkeys or depicting them as apes is a part of the literary canon of American and European racism. And so even though I understand that it's a fantasy trope, that maybe it wasn't done on purpose, it is uncomfortable to me to have monkey beast races exist alongside darker skinned characters are barbarians and not really have very many counterexamples. And part of me also wonders whether From Software kind of stumbled into this by accident, because Elden Ring is such a celebration of everything that From Software has already made. It is constantly referencing its previous games, not just all the Dark Souls games, but there are tons of parallels between Sekiro and Elden Ring, between Bloodborne and Elden Ring, because they just wanted to include all of the different narrative trappings that they have used in each part of the game. And that I have no issue with. I actually really liked how monkeys were used in Sekiro because they were used in a way that was culturally relevant and significant to the history and stories of Japan. They weren't being used in a derogatory way. And there's the other part of where I am feeling ambivalent, where I'm having two minds about how these enemy types and the Lu clan characters are being used, and that is that it's still honest to Western storytelling. Western storytelling often has very negative depictions of outside cultures. Xenophobia in the form of insulting and putting down cultures as beast-like is common. It's normal. It's accurate to Western fantasy. And I enjoy Western fantasy, so to a certain extent, I also get why the simplicity of the evil, primitive other is an appealing kind of story dynamic. I just can't help but feel that there is a conflict in the mutability of the author and how the text can just be explained away as, oh, well, that's just part of the world's lore and doesn't have anything to do with the real world and how real people think and depict things. And really, I just can't make that separation. Stories are written by people who have thoughts, ideas, and beliefs and want to communicate those beliefs to an audience. They're not telling stories in a vacuum, they're telling stories in our world, in our society. We live in a society. And so it's just, it's something that I can't really get over. I'm wondering if this is something that was just an inclusion by George R.R. Martin because he works in fantasy, because he's familiar and using those tropes. But I can't know. There's no degree to which I can explore this aspect of the story in more depth because it's not something that has been tackled by people who have access to writers or George R.R. Martin, and I don't believe it will be. So on my part, it's just kind of aimless speculation. It is a bad feeling. It is a little grody feeling that just kind of places a film over character design and world building that I don't like. But I'm going to move on from that topic because I kind of don't have a solution for that one, and I don't want to beat the dead horse. But then my fifth gripe, the story and how it is expressed is a little weird to me. Not that it is different than how other From Software games have presented their stories. From Software is still doing the vague narrative, the piecing little bits together to form an understanding of the world thing that they do with most of their games. I wouldn't really say all, because Sekiro wasn't exactly that way, but for most of their games. The only issue that I'm really having with that this time is that story beats are so far and few between that it becomes kind of hard to track. Only in the session that I've been playing today of this recording, which is around 100 hours of play, have I started into a pretty decent clip where I am seeing multiple story beats fall into line in a single area for a single side quest. But my earlier experience of the game was that I would have a narrative moment, and then it would be maybe 4 or 5 days before I have another narrative significant moment. And I think whereas the obtuse narrative, the obtuse storytelling worked extremely well for all of the other Souls-like games that From Software has created, I wonder if it's right to call From Software's games Souls-likes, since they are the Souls games. Put a pin in that. That's not relevant to today's discussion. But it worked for From Software's other games because they were mainly linear. Even though they had somewhat open spaces, you could do things in various orders, the games themselves were fairly linear concentric tunnels. And that was okay. It made the story unobtrusive. But I can't help but feel that in this setting, having story be a little bit more obtrusive would be better. For example, our level up lady, Melina, appears almost never, even though the tonality of her voice and how we interact with her would suggest that we're supposed to start caring about this character a bit more. But I've maybe seen her 4 times in 100 hours of play. The last time I talked to her, she told me to talk to Bok the Seamster, and then when I talked to Bok the Seamster, he kinda didn't have anything to say. So where was that supposed to direct me? Bok the Seamster is kinda also in my critique of the demi-humans because he's kinda subservient by nature and is also Beastman. And I mean, it really just feels like Dobby the slave elf. And I mean, come on, that's a little on the nose. Anyway, moving away from those things, let me end this somewhat negative video with some positives that have happened more recently than when I have written this outline. And that is, in the most recent sections that I've played, I have found significantly more of the upgrade material, of the respec material, so I feel a bit better, a bit more confident in my ability to experiment with different builds, so I'm excited for that. And also, a lot of the story that I've been engaging with has been amazing. A couple set pieces that I just encountered, and that a couple bosses that I just beat, well, it pulled a Nier Automata. It created an event in the game that significantly changed the map in a different area, and I was so impressed because I remembered that section of the map and did find it kind of strange that that one section, compared to everything around it, was so empty. And that's because it was a set piece. It was a placeholder for something way more significant, a vast change in the map and the landscape itself that I absolutely loved. And the fact that I could, once again talking about how much I love the map of this game, look at the direction that the event happened with my telescope, my spyglass, see a change on the horizon, mark it with a beacon, and then head to that beacon in real time and find the change in the map. It was such a perfect closing of the book, or at least turning of the page to the next chapter, after the event that caused that to happen was so mind-blowing in terms of its theatrics and cinematics that all played out in real time, in gameplay, without cutting to cutscenes, except for the ones at the beginning and end. But one of those cutscenes was optional and the other was just a reward, so it all felt really good. And that's pretty much it. That's really the majority of the gripes that I've been having with this game. And if you think about it, it's not that many. These aren't really huge issues. They aren't the focus of the game. They are gripes that are on the side of the things that most people are going to be focusing on, that I am focusing on. Every single negative thing that I can point out about this game has a positive twist on it that I can't get over either. And you may want to say that I'm just hyping it up, that I kind of scraped at nothing and the other real significant issues are far more significant. Like I could point to how people are finding some of the controls unresponsive, that you have to re-click into a button if you happen to like walk over a ledge, or and that causes you to stop shielding or stop crouching. And all of those things, like, I get, and they do frustrate and mess me up sometimes, but I think that's just a matter of getting accustomed to the controls. There have been plenty of times where I've had my guard broken open and I have learned to let go of the shield button and then press it again before the next attack comes rather than holding shield, and that has fixed problems with the shield not consistently staying up. There are things that you can do to mitigate the minor technical problems. If you're playing on console, I don't really know what the experience for the PC players is at this moment. Last time I checked, they were still having a pretty rough time of it. There hadn't been a patch to make the PC version more stable or more playable. I've also heard that some people are having no issues on PC at all. PC is the Wild West. I play on console for these games because I know they're being designed for console, they're being ported to PC as a secondary consideration, and so I've not had those issues, so I'm only talking to my experience, not the experiences that I haven't had, that other people are the experts on. So what I'm going to start doing next is I'm going to pivot now that I have made 2 videos that are focused on being spoiler-free and talking about the game in more vague terms. Next, I'm going to transition into some speculation videos. I won't really call these lore videos because I'm not going to be doing that much research. I'm not going to be checking against the community and what people already know because I'm still playing the game myself and I don't want to spoil myself on the experience while I'm playing. However, I do want to speculate about the story a bit more so that I can address my gripes with the story and see things more clearly by actually trying to put some pieces together. I think that is a big part of enjoying the story of these games, and this time, rather than doing it offline, behind the scenes, I'm going to do it in front of all of you, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. The first thing that I'm going to be speculating on is the idea of the relationship between the Erd Tree, the Grace, and the Tarnished. I'm going to give some ideas, some ambient background ideas that I've been having about what that dynamic actually is like. And yeah, I'm going to get into a little bit of the philosophical influences that I think I'm seeing. Hopefully you'll enjoy those, I'm not sure, but that's the next video on the Erd Tree, speculative lore, not really like canonical lore. I'm not putting out absolute I've solved it theory. Hopefully it'll just be fun for you guys to watch, and then if you have evidence that is absolutely disproving what I say, you can put it in the comments and I can use that in future speculation videos. We can make it a bit of a back and forth, and that'll be fun, that'll be enjoyable for me and you. So thank you so much for watching, my friends. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe, like, and support me on Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous. And if you haven't seen it yet, go back to the video that I did talking about all of the things that I'm loving about Elden Ring, and I will see you next time. Stay true.